because this meeting is a Zoom meeting as well, I'd like to remind all participants when they're speaking to speak into the microphone, because the only way that the public can hear you through Zoom is if you do speak into the microphone. That would include anyone coming up to the podium. So thank you. First thing on the agenda is approval of the minutes from our regular meeting of August 19th of 2020. Have you had a chance to review those? Any corrections or additions?
The only thing I had was on the extension of the executive order. It was not explained in the minutes what that executive order was. It just said the extension of an executive order that's due to expire on August 31st, 2020. It didn't say what it was. So that'd be the only thing to correct. And I know it was about, that'd be fine, just for reference.
So we'll make that change in the minutes. Any other changes?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as they were presented.
Okay, I have a motion from Nancy to approve the minutes with the amendment.
I will second that.
I have a second from Chad. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. We had another set of minutes from a special meeting on September 3rd, and you had a chance to review that.
Upon reviewing, I would go ahead and make a motion to accept the minutes as presented.
I have a motion from Paul.
I'll second it.
I have a second from John.
I have potentially one correction. I don't know if it's necessary. I noticed in previous minutes, when it included a Zoom attendee, that it specified that that attendee was there via Zoom or call-in, and I was present via a phone call. My Zoom connection wasn't working.
We should add that.
We should, yeah, okay. Thank you for that. Any other corrections to it? If not, we'll make the motion with the correction as Chad is.
Correct. Motion made to amend it to add Chad as being present via telephone call, please.
Good with that, John? Okay. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, we've asked Brendell Earnsberger to come in and bring everyone up to date. I've invited a lot of people, and some of the newer organizations that are involved in this, just so they know where we left off in our planning that we had conducted back in 2016, I think it was. And just to tell us where we were when we left off that project. So that's at least a starting point, grounding point for us going forward as we address our priorities in our project plan. So with that, I think, do you want to introduce, or Kevin, do you want to introduce yourself, or?
Either way, fine.
Why don't you come on up and.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Kevin Osborne. I'm president of Brendell Earnsberger Associates. And
If you'd like to take your mask off.
okay, I'm fine. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah.
It's a little muffled.
Is it muffled? Okay. So, yeah, I thank you, Mayor, and thank you, councilors, for inviting us back to talk to you a little bit about the project and where we were. So, Renee is going to flip through the slides as I speak. Yeah, sorry. There you go. There's our agenda. We want to talk a little bit about the original purpose and the goals for the project, as well as going back and talk about the history of the project, not only before we got involved, but also what happened once we got involved. And then talk about the existing conditions on the square itself, and then this schematic design that was completed in 2016 and 2017, and a little bit then maybe looking forward about what some of the tasks remaining in the design and engineering would be, and the timeline, potential timeline for that. So as we talk about purpose and goals, goals for the project. Next slide. These were the goals that were outlined in the request for proposals that we responded to, starting with upgrading the infrastructure that is on the square. And we're going to talk in detail about the age and the condition of that infrastructure. But also, obviously, enhancing local quality of life and the businesses along the square and in downtown. Creating a space that would encourage downtown living and catalyze private investment, creating a walkable, pedestrian-friendly space, and a vibrant, mixed-use regional destination at the heart of downtown. And then it's really about investing in the future of the city as well. As we kind of think about that in context around the country, the trends that are happening in downtowns all around the country, one of the ways that we like to illustrate that is to talk about these community preference surveys that the National Association of Realtors has put out. I think they do it every 2 years, and they've done it for the last almost the last decade. What they do is they look at when obviously they're realtors, so they take a survey as to what are people looking for when they're looking to buy a residence or buy their home, and they draw conclusions based on those surveys. Some of the conclusions are listed there, that Americans prefer to live in mixed-use, walkable communities. 60% prefer walkable communities with a mix of houses, stores, and businesses. And the more walkable the community is, the more satisfied residents are with the quality of life. And 6 in 10 will spend more to live in a walkable community. And that is across multiple demographic groups, from millennials to Gen Xers to the silent generation and the greatest generation. The top desired community features that appear again and again in these surveys is safe routes for walking and riding bikes to work and shopping and to school, and shops or restaurants within an easy walk of your home. Similarly, the EPA put out, I think this was in 2013, a study where they looked at the business case for walkable communities and what they refer to as smart growth. And what they discovered is that companies recognize that compact, walkable downtowns are good for business, and they are selecting those types of communities as they make their determination on where they want to locate their operations. They've discovered that it leads to increased productivity and innovation, ability to compete for labor, so attracting talent and retaining that talent, and it leads to stronger retail sales. And then in our own practice, we've done work not just in Indiana, but around the country. We're seeing this in nearly every community that we work in, that each of these communities are reinvesting in their downtown and in those unique attributes or spaces in their community. I think all of those images are projects that we worked on, with the exception of the one in the lower left, and that's your neighbor down the road here, Huntingburg, Indiana. Let's talk a little bit then about the project history. In 2013, a downtown plan was completed with a recommended action item to move forward with a design for streetscape enhancements for the square, to slightly reduce the space dedicated to cars and add some of that back to create slightly wider sidewalks, and create activity nodes in the four corners of the square. The components of that included roughly 12-foot wide sidewalks with amenity zones along those walks, 18-foot long parking, perpendicular parking, much like you have today, 24-foot travel lanes, which is enough for two lanes, two cars side by side, tree plantings, some green infrastructure, some special paving, and those kinds of things. So that was the 2013 plan. And then we were engaged in late 2015 by the city's courthouse committee to lead the design and engineering of the project. Early 2016, we completed a topographic survey. We also did a detailed inventory and analysis of the existing conditions on the square. We prepared some initial concepts and presented those to the committee and to the public in an open house. And then following that in the summer, we moved forward with more detailed schematic design, presented that to the Redevelopment Commission, and held at least one meeting, I think, maybe a couple meetings with the downtown merchants and business owners. The following spring, the project was placed on hold, I believe, due to other priorities in the community. And then more recently, in August of last year, the Impact Jasper Comprehensive Plan identified moving forward with the courthouse square as a top priority. So let's talk about some of the existing conditions then on the square. And when we looked at the existing conditions, we primarily looked at the pavement, the roadway pavements, the sidewalk zones, and then the utilities. When we looked at the pavements, we relied on information provided to us by the city in their 2016 pavement condition ranking, which ranks pavements in the community on a scale of 1 to 10. The courthouse square itself and the legs of Main Street were in very poor condition, a 3 out of 10. And again, this was 4 years ago. 6th Street from Main to Newton was just within the good category of a 6 out of 10, and 6th Street from Main to Jackson was in the good category from 8 to 10. So in conclusion, the pavement needs to be replaced. Basically everything you see there in that reddish brown color. And you can kind of flip through these photos, Renee, but you get a sense of the condition of the pavement and the sort of the annual upkeep that's necessary on that pavement. When we talk about curbs and ramps at the time, so this was 2016, the city had been waiting about 8 years to replace those sidewalks and those ramps. Most, if not all, of the ramps around the square are not ADA compliant. The curbs have been patched. They're inconsistent from block to block. The sidewalk materials are uneven and not consistent. And the planters that are there, they're nice, but they're really not large enough to hold trees or other types of green infrastructure that could help with stormwater runoff. So again, the conclusion is curbs, ramps, sidewalks, planters all need to be replaced and upgraded to meet ADA standards. And again, some photos that just give you a sense of the differences, the different types of pavements and conditions around the square on the sidewalks. And then last but not least, the utilities, beginning with the water lines. The water lines were built 100 years ago. They're all well beyond their useful life. The sanitary sewers were built in the early 40s, so you're roughly 80 years old now. They are beyond their useful life. And the storm pipes are all clay pipes, which we don't use clay pipe anymore when we build storm sewers. And those are really beyond their useful life. So we're looking at a comprehensive replacement of most, if not all, of the water, sanitary, and storm lines that are below these roadways. And we've estimated that's roughly about a third of the total project cost, we believe, is in those utilities. There are some storm drainage issues in the alleys that lead into the square, and those need to be addressed, and that's part of what the city was hoping to do at the time as part of the project. And then moving into the schematic design, which was wrapped up in May of 2017, you get with this graphic kind of a sense of the scope of the project, where we were looking at brick pavers on the sidewalks and in the parking areas, but with keeping the roadway an asphalt roadway. We would have roughly 47 parking spaces on the square itself and about 20 spaces on the streets leading into the square. The square itself would have a flush curb condition. So no curb between the sidewalks and the parking, so that it could be used and easily flexible, I guess, for public events and festivals and that kind of thing. And then we would have nodes at all four corners of the square, and then on the inside at the corners of the courthouse curb. So the overall schematic plan, where you see sort of the scope of the construction and design, and you'll note the alleyways on the south side of the square, how those are part of the scope of work. Again, brick sidewalks, brick parking areas, street trees, you begin to see where those would occur, the stormwater planters, the amenity zones. And then we also identified what would really be some components that could be added into the project at some future point. Those include gateway markers at all four corners of the square, the corner nodes themselves, and at the time there was a consideration of public restrooms just next to City Hall here, within the parking lot of City Hall. This is basically the same graphic, just slightly enlarged on the north side of the square. You begin to see kind of in more detail the parking configuration and on both the square and the side streets, and then on the south side. A cross-section then through the proposed design, starting at the courthouse, the lawn or the curb around the courthouse itself, with 26 feet of travel lanes, so just over 24 feet as recommended in the original plan, 18 feet of parking, and then a total of about 20 feet for the sidewalk zone, which is an enhancement over what's out there today. There's about 15 feet or so out there today. That zone would include about 14 feet of sidewalk and 6 feet of amenity zone. A cross-section, similar cross-section then, this being through Main Street, that shows how the angled parking would work. We actually studied both parallel and angled parking. Parallel would result in a couple of parking spaces less, and I think there was some concern at the time about navigating into parallel spaces. So at the time we opted for the angled parking, which leaves about 9-foot wide sidewalks on either side of the Main Street there. Just a plan view of that same location. And then another cross-section of that same location. And then this gives you a sense of what the typical sidewalk view would look like, with that amenity zone of planters and street lights and trees and benches, all sort of forming that edge between the parking zone and the sidewalk zone. As I mentioned, we settled on clay brick pavers, as opposed to concrete pavers or some other type of pavers, because clay has a longer lifespan, a higher durability, a better appearance, and which all results in lower maintenance costs over time. You're looking at a photograph of a project we just completed in Carmel, Indiana, which had a significant amount of clay pavers, both in the roadway, which is not what we're proposing here, but also on the sidewalks and in the plaza zones. Same project there. You can see the brick pavers in the roadway, which are actually permeable brick pavers, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And then the variations in color that we can get with clay in the plaza zone there. So when we talk about pavers, I think it's important that we understand what we really mean when we talk about the cross-section that would be installed. So starting at the surface, there would be obviously brick, but then that sits on a 1-inch asphalt setting bed and then on a rigid concrete base, so and then over compacted aggregate and compacted subgrade. And that's kind of a typical section. Sometimes we'll go to a thicker concrete base. But what this really means is it prevents any settling of the brick, any tripping hazards that might develop over time. This is almost exactly the same cross-section that was used in the Huntingburg project on 4th Street along their sidewalks. And then this next image shows you what a permeable brick paving system would look like. And you really can't tell the difference between the permeable and a standard brick paver system, with the exception of the joints between the bricks. They're just slightly wider by maybe a 1/16 or an 1/8 of an inch. And they're filled with a aggregate material that allows water to seep through the joints and into the aggregate layers below the bricks. So next slide, if you look at the cross-section, instead of a rigid concrete base, the parking lanes, as we're proposing them, would have this permeable system. And instead of a rigid concrete base, it would be an aggregate base that's built up in layers and compacted as it's built up. Roughly about 18 to 24 inches of aggregate below those pavers. And that aggregate bed then becomes a place where stormwater can be stored until it percolates back into the ground. Again, if you want to see a local example of this, I keep bringing up Huntingburg, but I'm sorry about that. Go down to Huntingburg and look at their roadway. Their roadway is actually built with permeable pavers. That's fine. The next slide talks about some of the green infrastructure components, which is for us is about how we manage stormwater. Rather than just collecting stormwater and sending it into the storm sewer pipes, what we nowadays try to do is actually keep as much of the stormwater out of the system as we can, or at least slow it down before it gets into the system. So those are called best management practices, and we would employ a number of those practices on this project. I mentioned the permeable pavers already, but the planters themselves can be used as, we call them stormwater planters, but essentially rain gardens or bioswales to, again, help collect water. And then we will likely be looking at some underground storage tanks, which you see on the far right there. Again, those are rigid and structural, so that we can basically fill in around those and pave over the top of them, but they're basically underground reservoirs that help store large quantities of stormwater. Some examples of what we might be thinking about in some of the corner rooms, those nodes at the corners of the square, which we'd like them to be nice, sort of restful sitting areas, perhaps working with some of the local furniture manufacturers to create some unique furnishings in those spaces. And then last but not least, I guess in terms of next steps or process and timeline, we need to go through a more detailed design and engineering phase of design development and then construction documents to prepare the bid documents for the project. And you can see the corresponding estimated timelines for each of those components. I think that's it.
Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate that. And again, this was intended to bring everyone just up to speed with where we left off when the project was first brought to, or not first brought to the council, but last brought to the council. And with that, as a priority, the intention is to put together a working group that would then take this plan and say, what do we like about it, what we don't like about it, what are we going to do going forward, probably see what next steps would be. But I appreciate you taking the time to come down here and share. Probably no one knows it better than what you did, so.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I do have an agenda item that was not published on your agendas, council, and I'd like to move it into this slot. And this is a request for a favorable recommendation for the Riverfront District alcoholic beverage license. Okay, and this is for Hosties. And you may have noticed that there's been a lot of activity down here in that site next to the Tim Clark Cultural Center. And I've asked Nick Hostetter to come and just kind of give us a little brief about the project. But again, I'm going to request at the end of this, after he does this, I'm going to request that you provide me the opportunity to send a favorable recommendation to the state Indiana Alcoholic Beverage Commission. I think that's the right location it's going, the ATC, okay.
Mayor, the last one we approved for the, I can't remember the name of the other business, but it doesn't matter. But how long did that take? Does anybody know? 3 weeks or 2 weeks? Or?
We have, Nick has a timeline.
Told by the ATC that it'll be about a 6-week timeline.
Okay, because they have a ribbon cutting date set for theirs, and I imagine they'll either they have their license now or they will definitely have it by then.
So I don't anticipate having my license in time for my opening, but it's not going to stop me from serving food.
Thanks, Nick, for coming. You want to?
No problem. I can give just a little brief overview. Hosties, we're going to be a pizza, pasta, and a baked sandwich establishment. I think our main focus is on the food. We want to be a family restaurant. We want to welcome people after ball games and whatnot. But nothing goes better with pizza than a beer or pasta with a glass of wine. So it's kind of a vital part of the business plan. We are doing a lot of work to the area. I think we're beautifying the building, making it something that's going to look nice next to the new cultural center that's an absolute gem for this city. Let's see, I guess I can break down. Depends on how much you guys want to know or if you have any questions. But we are, like I said, our focus is on the dining. We are going to employ probably up to 25 people, possibly more depending on how many part-timers we get versus full-timers. And that's always a struggle here locally, is keeping those positions filled. We do use local contractors. We've used local contractors for everything we've done at this point. And we will continue to use them for our parking lot maintenance, lawn maintenance, roof, HVAC, so on and so forth.
Nick, back to that license, what hours are you anticipating and what type of license? Are you wanting just beer and wine?
It is a 3-way license, but I think in the beginning we're just going to serve beer and wine. I don't have I'm not planning to serve hard alcohol. It might work in later, but it's just not our focus.
And then your hours approximately?
Our hours, I'm looking at 11 a.m. until 8 or 9 p.m. And I was thinking Friday or Saturday we'd be open until 9 p.m. We are going to be closed Sunday and Monday. I may extend those hours depending on, I know people after Little League games and so on and so forth like to go somewhere to eat. So we'll kind of play it by ear, but I'm hoping maybe we can stay open a little later to accommodate that crowd.
Will there be carry out of the liquor of any kind? Okay.
Well, sounds good. I know we all know you from Missouri and your good, long-standing track record over there of keeping a nice facility, and excited to get that facility spruced up a little bit and become a part of that whole Riverfront project, so.
Excited too.
So I would go ahead and make a motion to give the mayor a favorable recommendation to approach the state ATC commission and provide for the permit for the Riverfront.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, I have a motion from Paul and a second from Nancy. Any further discussion on it?
Great, thank you for doing that with that property. It's looking really nice.
Thank you.
If not, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Nick.
You, good luck.
The next thing on the agenda is a public hearing, and this is for the additional appropriation for 2020. This appropriation was published in the Herald on September 8th of 2020. But this time I'd like to open the public hearing. Are there any comments from the public? Hearing or seeing none, I would ask for a motion to close the public hearing.
Make that motion to close the public hearing, Mayor?
I have a motion from Paul to close the public hearing.
I'll second.
I have a second from Phil. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. That's ordinance number 2020-19, an ordinance appropriating additional money for the city of Jasper for the remainder of the year ending December 31st, 2020. This is available for one reading only procedure. Could I have a motion to consider the ordinance for one reading only?
I'll make a motion for one reading only.
I have a motion from Dave for one reading only. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Second from Paul. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Could I have a motion to have the ordinance read in full or by title only?
Make the motion to read by title only, please.
Motion from Paul to read by title only.
I'll second.
I have a second from Kevin. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Would the city attorney please read ordinance number 2020-19 by title only?
Ordinance number 2020-19, an ordinance appropriating additional money for the city of Jasper, Indiana for the remainder of the year ending December 31st, 2020.
Could I have a motion to pass and adopt ordinance number 2020-19?
So move.
Motion from Nancy. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
I have a second from Dave. Any further discussion on this?
One question, Rookser Golf Course wages, 110,000, what is that? Can you speak to that, Alan? It's 1150 under Rookser Golf Course. It says Rookser Golf Course wages, 110,000. It's on page 5.
This is a reduction?
The first column's reduction, right?
No, on that side, it's all reduction.
On the left side's all reduction.
Yeah.
Okay, that answers it.
Yeah. Okay, it's a good point to ask the question for clarification. Thanks. Any other questions? If not, I have a motion from Nancy and a second from Dave. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Okay. Now I'd like to open a public hearing for the 2021 budget. The Form 3 notice to taxpayers was uploaded into Gateway on September 11th, 2020. Is there any comments or questions from the public? Okay. Seeing none, I'd ask that we make a motion to close the public hearing.
I'll make that motion.
Motion from Nancy to close it. Second. A second from John. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Public hearing is closed. Next is ordinance number 2020-20, which is the ordinance containing the appropriations for the 2021 budget. And this is available for one reading only.
We'll go ahead and make the motion to have this read for one reading only, please.
Motion from Paul for one reading only.
I'll second.
Second from Kevin. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Could I have a motion to have the ordinance read in full or by title only?
I'll make a motion to read ordinance 2020-20 by title only.
Motion from Nancy,
I'll second that.
second from Phil. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Could the city attorney please read ordinance number 2020-20?
Ordinance number 2020-20, an ordinance appropriating money for the city of Jasper, Indiana for the year 2021.
Could I have a motion to approve the ordinance on the first reading?
I'll make that motion.
I have a motion from Dave,
I'll second.
a second from Kevin. Any further discussion on this?
Mayor, I'd just like to comment that through your guidance, the department heads worked very hard on keeping a pretty tight budget for the next year, and anyway, it seems to have worked out well.
So far, it has.
We'll see how it goes.
You know, a budget is a plan, and that's exactly what we're approving. So there will be adjustments along the way, just like we approved those appropriations earlier.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, any other discussion? If not, could I call for a vote? All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Before you all leave tonight, several of the ordinances need to be signed by you all.
We'll have those up here.
The budget one, though, will go for 2 more readings, right?
Yes. Yes.
October 21st, it's dated.
This was not a one reading.
No,
This is the first reading.
First reading.
Okay.
that other one was additional appropriations. That was 1 reading.
Okay, when you start getting 3 pages of agenda items, you know, it's nice to put 1 page behind us, so bear with us. The next item on the agenda is ordinance number 2020-21, and this ordinance contains the advertised property tax rate of 1.0405 for the 2021 budget, and this is available for the first reading. So there will be additional readings as well. So could I have a motion to read the ordinance for the first reading in full or by title only?
I still move for one reading, or for title only, sorry.
I have a motion from Chad for title only. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second from Paul. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the city attorney, please read the ordinance.
Ordinance number 2020-21, an ordinance levying taxes and fixing the rate of taxation for the city of Jasper, Indiana for the fiscal year ending December 31st, 2021.
Okay, could I have a motion to approve the ordinance on the first reading?
I'll make that motion.
Nancy?
I'll second.
I have a second from Dave. I'd like to open up for discussion, and I think, Alan, if you wouldn't mind sharing where we are.
For 2021, our rate is 1.0405. Our advertised rate for 2020 was 1.1099, and the actual rate for 2020 was 0.8458. So they will lower it when it actually comes through our budget, or 1782 notice comes out. That tells us how much money we're actually getting. That will actually have the rate in that. Okay.
So our rate is actually lower than it was last year at this point in time. Okay, thanks, Alan. Appreciate that. So with that, we have a motion from Nancy and a second from Dave. All in favor of ordinance number 2020-21, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
Renee, do you have them to pass around now? Son? You start with me and I'll just...
Next item is ordinance number 2020-18. And this is an ordinance regulating the use of the discharge of any firearms, bows, or any other like instrument within the corporate limits of the city of Jasper, Indiana. It's repealing ordinance number 2004-12.
Before we get into this, would we be able to table this before we go through a lengthy discussion? Because there's still some things I think that we need to discuss. That's my opinion on,
When would we discuss it if we don't discuss it tonight?
well, we can discuss it. You want to discuss it now? We can. Go ahead.
I mean, we can, or
We can discuss it after the meeting and throw some ideas out that we're thinking about that would give us a better opportunity for something like this to pass, I think.
So, sorry. You absolutely can table it, that's not a problem. To the extent that you have ideas that you'd like to see, maybe language changes, then you can certainly forward those to me. Obviously, we can't have a group meeting about those outside of this meeting, but.
As long as we have less than a quorum, we can.
That's true. Yep.
And this is not something we could discuss this evening and then table after some discussion?
You could.
That would, maybe bring up a little dialogue this evening, so for a short discussion, and then we can come back in and chat if there's something else that we see. My opinion.
So if somebody wants to offer some comments, that's fine.
I can. I'll start it off. I posed an idea to the mayor, an idea that I would like to see discussed before we go in doing this, and that would be setting up an archery range at the Rookser Golf Course, and do it right, have it a first-class archery range, and take all of the archery shooting in the backyards and the crossbows and everything else out of the city, and they have a good location to go that's safe, that we could have a state-of-the-art archery range down there and make it available to people in the city. That takes all of the safety issues out of the neighborhoods that I know people feel very strongly about. So that's what I was wanting to consider. I think that makes the most sense, and not necessarily 100% at Rookser. That was an available property that we have, and I'm thinking you could do it right and not have anybody endangered in any way, shape, or form, and that could possibly be a win-win for everybody, be a win-win for the archers and win-win for those concerned with safety in the neighborhoods. And so I suggested that, and that's why I wanted to bring it up tonight. I'm willing to listen to anything else.
it's an interesting concept.
I'd be highly in favor of that, as long as, from a legal standpoint, there wouldn't be any issues with the city on city property having a range like that. I mean, are there, Renee? Okay.
And then we would run that as a business, Kevin, and people would pay to go there.
Do they pay at the gun club?
Yeah.
But that's
An annual membership.
private.
I'm just saying that.
I just feel more comfortable with that, being as I don't think it,
I would like to see it be like the gun club, only for archery and set up, and if there are dues or charges or something, I'm all for that too. I don't think, what does the gun club charge? Dean, I know you're.
$50 per year.
What is it?
$50 per year.
Okay, that's
For membership, yeah.
into it.
So what is that used for then, the targets and that type of stuff then? That $50, anybody?
Maintenance of the facilities and grounds. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of that goes into a range, and the maintenance of the range is really important. So,
Well, actually, we had a little discussion with Kevin Shepherd about that when we were in his backyard, and he indicated, where was it, Chad, in Princeton or somewhere down there? Someone started a range about 2 years ago, and because of all of the liability and legalities and everything, that person is now out of business, and they put, what did he say, $1.5 million or something like that into it?
The way I understood it is that was a combination indoor firearms and archery range.
It's an indoor.
We're not interested in that.
So, but what I mean is that there may be things that we're not even aware of that could be costly for doing something like that, but that definitely is a interesting concept. So with that in mind, would we then not allow it at all in people's backyards?
That's what I'd like to
His
see.
comment was that take it away from the personal property and put it into a public park
Well, it's
department-based.
a major concern in our.
oh, and we'd have to, this is definitely an idea worth pursuing, and so that to Kevin, today, the Jasper Rifle and Gun Club allows archery. So if you're an archer, you can go out there and practice. And some of it is fairly flat, others are somewhat pitched if you want to, but, I mean, those opportunities are there today.
But does anybody use it? Yeah, at the gun club.
I can't say I've seen an archer out there.
A little bit. The instances in which you're going to be able to use it is if no one else is on the firing line with firearms. That's my understanding is their preference. So it could be limited. I frankly love the idea of the city having an archery range available to the public. I think it could be a huge asset, especially if this sport continues to grow in the trajectory that it's already on nationally. I mean, you've heard from the public comment last meeting that we're kind of behind the 8 ball as far as the rise in popularity amongst the schools. And I think that's not going to change anytime soon. This outdoor activity is really where it's at right now. This is just an extension of that. So I would love to have that. I don't know how long it takes to get something like that done. In the meantime, we have an ordinance that is, again, already imperfect. Until we can have a range, perhaps we should look to get it closer to perfect. So a range, certainly, designed for the use of crossbows would be very attractive to me, and you wouldn't have to do that then in someone's backyard. But for the time being, we still have compound bows in use and long bows in use. And so how can we improve safety on the existing ordinance? And so there are certain things in the proposed ordinance that we've not really talked much about. We've always talked about the things that we're concerned about, but allowing for the police to declare a ceasefire because of unsafe conditions, I think is a vast improvement. Also allowing for the use of an elevated shot really shortens the trajectory of an arrow, or, well, in the sense of a crossbow, it'd be a bolt. But if we're not going to allow crossbows, then that's maybe a discussion for later. Another improvement that...
Back to that elevated shot, where is that in this ordinance?
We've just stricken it from the existing ordinance.
Okay.
And so, to me, if we had a city archery range, that would be something that we could offer that the gun club does not offer, a tower or two or more that allows for that kind of an angled shot. Again, that's a much safer shot than a parallel shot. So I was surprised whenever I read the original ordinance that these arrows currently must be released and from archer to target in a parallel manner. We can do better than that. Another thing, too, I feel a common sense thing that we can improve. very quickly without a lot of debate, I would hope, would be the use of 3D targets. They're just been proven as safe as bag targets, especially if you're following all the other provisions of the ordinance, the use of a backstop, and prohibition against shooting in a reckless manner. Also, the tightening of the language of what is reckless, I think, is a vast improvement over the existing ordinance. Those are some very serious things I think we could all agree with would be an improvement. There's perhaps some debate, if we're not going to allow crossbows, then should we really tighten those fines for the infractions, the offenses? Or right now, it's pretty low. It's $25 for first offense across the board, no matter what it is. What we're looking at is pretty serious. It's telling residents we're getting serious about safety here. What we're looking at is making it $500 for that first infraction. If it's a safety violation, if you're de facto reckless in the discharge of an arrow, that's $500.
It doesn't say that here by dollar amount, but is a Class C of 500?
In the original ordinance, it specifies dollar amounts, but because of the new UDO, I think is the right ordinance I'm talking about, it specifies Class A is this much and Class B is this much.
C would be 500.
Yeah, but I was in favor of that. Renee suggested tightening those or increasing the fines. I was in favor of that if we were going to allow crossbows, because I know that's a concern for folks. But if we're not going to do that, I'm wondering if that's something we put off till later as well.
Do we give any, have we given any fines? Do you know, Chief? Is there?
Not in years that I know of.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not saying never, but I just,
Yeah.
not that I can remember.
But maybe nobody's reported it either. Like Phil could have reported his neighbor, and that kid or mother could have gotten a fine. I have, on Section 6, under public property, a couple sentences down, it says, when approved by city council or the mayor, arrows may be discharged in conjunction with the managed hunt on public-owned property. Now, I don't mind the mayor doing that, but as a city council, do we want that kind of authority that we're giving someone permission to discharge in conjunction with the managed hunt on publicly owned property?
I read that as part of the property problem like Bloomington is having when you don't have inner city hunts and you have some green spaces, hollow parklands or whatever else, and you're starting to get deer that overpopulate those areas and start decimating neighborhood landscaping, get hit on streets all the time. Their city council up there came into them and said, okay, we're going to send out a raffle for a managed hunt on there. It wasn't just the mayor saying, why don't you go out, and Alan, you go out, and Nathan, you go out, and you guys shoot 3 deer off the parkland each or whatever. It came in front of the board.
Okay.
That's how I read it.
Okay,
So maybe I'm interpreting it wrong, but I don't
That's right.
think that's right.
that probably is right.
They go out and they recruit professionals.
That's right, professional sharpshooters or marksmen, yeah.
There are a lot of hoops to jump through on something like that. Renee, mayor has a veto, does he not? Is that correct? How would that work?
He did not sign it.
Okay, is there a veto proof majority, is it 2/3, or is there anything like that?
To overthrow a veto?
Truthfully, yeah, I'll have to give you.
My point is, I think that's a good check. I mean, if you have enough people who are in disagreement, it's just not a good idea anyway. But, I mean, gosh, if the mayor doesn't like it, the mayor has a veto. If the mayor likes it, we don't have a veto, do we? On something like that.
Well, in that case, so again, the mayor has a veto with respect to the passage of laws.
Ordinance.
Now, if it's a motion to allow a hunt, and it's something that is approved by the council, that would come to the mayor's desk for him
Approval.
to sign off on.
And I think we're a long, long way from having to have managed hunts in the city of Jasper, but
Neighbors would disagree.
Is in there is because of the side-by-side language about the prohibition of shooting an animal. Currently, there's nothing that specifically says that, other than it says you must have a target which is a bag target or a flat target. But I think that cleans it up a little bit too. Under, it's very clear. Don't shoot fish, don't shoot an animal, don't shoot people, very clear. And then the only exception there would be in the event that we're in a Bloomington situation where something needs to be done with that, then the city council does not have to go back and reinvent an ordinance like we're doing right now. It's already in there. We're kind of foreseeing what could be in the future.
And sorry, I didn't mean single out Bloomington. State parks, hunts, the same thing.
Well, there's probably a lot of,
Good example.
Is the range here, any range deemed unsafe? Is every backyard archery considered to be a range?
How do you get approval for that? If I want to go out in my backyard and shoot, how?
Follow the ordinance, you don't need
There
approval.
isn't any approval, right?
Now you don't, huh?
Isn't that the biggest part of the problem?
I think
Yes.
what's good about this ordinance, so is like Chad first mentioned, it's actually cleaning up. It's making the old ordinance a lot better because it's requiring the backstops, it's requiring, and it's letting the police chief or not the chief, but the police department has more say. They can inspect it and shut one down in about 2 seconds if it isn't deemed safe. Where now, they don't even have the authority to do that.
Yeah, if we do
That's what I like
what
about it.
Chad's suggesting, then is the crossbow included into the ordinance? Well,
it's written into the new one.
yeah. Well, then my opinion is that I've gotten several calls again about the crossbow and talked to several people that kind of jump me about it and don't feel good at all with it there. So in that case there, I would say that we wait till what Kevin suggests and see what we can do there before we change anything than what it is right now and have to go back and try to mess with it then. That's my opinion in the whole thing.
Renee, how difficult is it to, on the fly here, I know we can make amendments to an amendment proposed, but how many line items can we scratch out? I mean,
You make as many changes as you want, as long as everyone is clear on what the language will look like when those changes are finished.
I want to caution, though, of rushing into a law. I think you really need to.
I'd like to make a recommendation that we table this, and Chad, let's go back and revisit this before next month's meeting, scratch out what we want, the changes that we want to make, and see if we can get agreement to go with this until we can get an archery range built. Because I do think this is better than what we had, but it does have the.
We'll take the archery range to the Park and Rec Department,
Right.
the board.
I highly second that.
if I knew, in my heart of hearts, if I knew I could get 5 votes right tonight, I would propose we scratch the crossbow and recommend it for a 1 reading only, in anticipation that we could get that archery range at some point. I know these things take time, but if that's the only hangup,
I still have the hang-up with the line of sight thing, and I will not vote for this the way it sits now, and no offense, it's just that I know you mentioned that from a safety standpoint and a reckless standpoint, if there's a person there, but I just don't, I think we're making an ordinance that, 90% of the city of Jasper, I don't deem this to be safe, and I guess I'm confused by this here, why we're trying to rush some through for, that it's only going to work in less than 10% of the locations in the city of Jasper, and again, I just don't want anybody firing any type of anything at my house, even if I'm not in the yard there, because who's to say that I don't walk onto my back patio when they're firing? It just, if we don't have a line of sight restriction somewhere along the line, there's no way in hell I'm going to vote for that.
So what you're not voting for, what you're missing, though, is you're not voting for that this evening. You would be voting for a crossbow. That already exists. They can legally come out in your backyard today and shoot, as long as it's safe.
I think that
If we took crossbow and struck it from what's in front of us here this evening, on here, leaving the target, leaving the new 6x6 minimum backstop, allowing for the target in there, that puts more teeth in for Renee to do her job and the chief to do his job, where if you felt unsafe, you could call 482-2255 and have a police officer there in 10 minutes, I would assume, 10 minutes pretty much anywhere in the city. And if it's a dangerous situation, you could shut that down today. Now you can't. You can ask them to.
Really want to pass an ordinance, though, that's going to get changed in a month or so. Anyway, I personally think that there's probably, my comfort level on this is 0. And I really think that if we spend a little bit more time with it, and as Kevin said, let's not jump into, my own opinion, let's not jump into something in there. Let's reevaluate it again from that approach, and maybe we can kind of have what I feel is a little bit more, my comfort level would be, and Nancy, I'm sure the same way, our comfort level would be a little bit higher on some other type of ordinance on there for the remaining part of the city. And if it works for the city of Jasper, I'm all for it. It's a great sport. That's not my point. I would love to see it. It'd be a great activity for our youth and everything like that. I just don't, I think we're jumping into something just for the sake of having it, and that's again, my opinion.
I agree.
When we had the target practice, I wish you all had been there, because it even further reinforced what I was feeling. It didn't make me feel better. It made me feel worse about doing this in a backyard. And instead of being a 6-foot by 6-foot backdrop, or whatever that's called, I would prefer it be a 10 by 10. Chad is an experienced hunter, and truthfully, he missed the target, and the arrow went in the backdrop, and this was kind of what I would consider a practice arrow. They couldn't get it out of that wooden backdrop. So if that had hit a person, I mean, that person would have been hurt. So, I mean, I learned a lot that evening, which further reinforced my fears about this. And the other thing is, it says here the maximum allowable distance from archer to target is 40 yards. 40 yards is a long distance. I think that should be closer. I think that should be more like 20 yards as a maximum, not make it longer, because the longer it is, the more unreliable your arrow is going. These are just my opinions based on this observation that evening and measuring this off in front of my house and everything too.
So I want to confirm, Kevin, I think you made a motion to table.
Yeah.
I have a motion to table. Do I have a second? I have a second from Dave. All in favor of tabling 2020-18, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
Okay, I have 6 and 1.
Thank you all for being open-minded.
Thank you.
I think something will go through.
For the best product. I do believe that.
Come up with a better solution. Done. Yeah.
On the 3D target, I'm not sure what that is. Is that like a deer stinger?
Deer, turkey.
So you got a small doe there or something, and it's only 3 feet this way? What happens to the backstop on that then? Does it have to be?
You still have to have that backstop behind it.
Larger than the target itself. So if it's a 3 feet wide target, it's got to be at least 9 feet.
Okay.
I'm sorry. It's got to be at least 6 feet.
Okay.
Sorry.
Which isn't, that was my point last time. It's not very big on what your backstop has to be.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is ordinance number 2020-23. This is an ordinance establishing the rates and charges collected by the city of Jasper from the owners of property served by the sewage works of said city. So, could I have a motion to consider ordinance 2020-23 for one reading only?
So moved.
Motion from John, and Kevin. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Could I have a motion for the ordinance to be read in full or by title only?
Go ahead and make a motion to read by title only, please.
I have a motion from Paul,
Second.
second from Chad. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. City Attorney, please read ordinance number 2020-23 by title only.
Ordinance number 2020-23, an ordinance establishing rates and charges collected by the city of Jasper, Indiana, from the owners of property served by the sewage works of said city.
Could I have a motion to pass and adopt ordinance 2020-23?
So moved.
I have a motion from John,
I will second.
second from Chad. Any further discussion?
So just to explain, our current ordinance that lists our rates and charges for sewer includes one entire section that deals with the 2001 sewer extension and the surcharges that were related to that. Those charges, those bonds are going to be finished in December of this year, so those rates will fall off beginning January billings, or people that are receiving their bills in January. So this just deletes that entire section from our rate ordinance.
How many years they paid that, or how many, do you recall that or not?
Yeah, it's about 20 years.
About 20 years, okay.
2001.
Council when we voted.
Yeah, it says-
This is a good day.
That's right.
Somebody's bill's cheap.
Nobody wasn't too concerned about that, were they?
Have we got another Hooterville we can annex next, take sewer to again?
Might be a way to do it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have a motion from John and a second from Chad. Any other questions?
Nope. that's
If
all.
not, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Biz, you go talk to him.
Renee,
Yes.
there was something handed around and everybody signed it. Everybody signed one time, right? There was 2 sheets and I
That's just the information, that's the,
just want to make sure I use my pen all the time.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is ordinance number 2020-24. This asserts the jurisdiction of the city of Jasper over the water utility service within its corporate limits, prohibiting future main extensions by any water utility other than the city of Jasper within the corporate limits of Jasper without the express consent of the common council. So, with ordinance number 2020-24, could I have a motion to consider this ordinance for one reading only?
Make a motion, please.
Second.
Motion from Paul and a second from Nancy. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Any opposed? Okay. Could I have a motion to have the ordinance read in full or by title only?
Make the motion be read by title only, please.
I have a motion for title only from Paul,
I'll second.
second from Kevin. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Would the city attorney please read ordinance number 2020-24 by title only?
Ordinance number 2020-24, an ordinance asserting the jurisdiction of the city of Jasper over water utility service within its corporate limits and prohibiting future main extensions by any other utility other than city of Jasper within the corporate limits of Jasper without the express consent of the common council.
Can I ask a question, Renee?
Uh-huh.
Corporate limits is city limits. right?
That's correct.
It's not the 2-mile jurisdiction. Okay.
Could I have a motion to pass and adopt ordinance number 2020-24?
I'll make that motion.
I think I'm going to give it Kevin. Kevin's voice, and then Chad. Is that all right for a second? Okay. It was. Further discussion, we want to explain.
Yeah, explain a little bit.
Sure. So we've been in discussions for quite a while about our water utility and the territory. It was recommended during the 21st century utility study that is one of the items that we should proceed with, and that is establishing our city limits for all of our utilities except electric, which, as you know, is not in our control. So you can expect in the next coming months to see similar ordinances with respect to sanitary sewer and gas. But what this does is allows us some certainty with respect to development so that we know that when a development comes into the city limits, that the city of Jasper is going to be asked or is going to serve that customer or those customers unless there's someone better suited. So obviously, everybody knows Ireland Water is serving most, if not all, I guess all, of the Brookstone subdivisions. If in Brookstone 7, which is now under discussion, if they come to the city of Jasper and ask, or after annexation, if they're not annexed and they're not in the city limits, then this would not apply. But assuming that they annex, then Ireland would need to get the city's permission to service those customers.
I'm on the Water Committee, and there's been a long, lengthy discussion with Harlan on trying to set some parameters, and the biggest issue that we have is that we are the highest rated for fire protection, and it's due to the size of our lines, and that's the big discussion right now. They want to maybe put in smaller lines. We even lost a house in Brookstone out there, didn't we? Chip Kugler's house, because the pot collapsed. It didn't have enough, water that.
Fire trucks pull so much water through, it was sucking the line dry.
And see, we're thinking about safety, and so.
You're exactly right. We've been talking to Ireland about this issue for, 2 years. We started out with an agreement for water sales, and included in that new this idea of establishing territories. So we looked at the map for a long while with them, had numerous meetings, and identified what we all thought. We had it literally down to one parcel left to agree upon, and just couldn't quite get the map, couldn't quite get that job done. So then the idea came up, let's separate the agreements and let's have a sales contract and a territory agreement. And I reluctantly, we agreed to that. So we went down that road and had those discussions again for quite a while. And you're right, Kevin, at the end of the day, with respect to any of the agreements, the final hurdle that we just couldn't get over was what to do about the development in our 2-mile jurisdiction, where our standards apply because our UDO has jurisdiction over those developments. But they just were not satisfied with the idea that the city of Jasper has the final say over what standards can be used. So
That's a good start, anyway, toward
One
that.
other thing, just to add to that, is I think we're still working on a reciprocal agreement with the city of Huntingburg, so they would be our backup water supply, and we would be their backup water supply. I think that discussion is still going.
I think they've been looking at a couple of options for the backup water supply, Huntingburg being one of those.
This may be a dumb question, but if somebody's planning a new development, does that prohibit them in any way, or are they more apt to say, I'm not interested in doing it because of that? I mean, is it a hurdle?
It shouldn't be. The thing about it is that, Brookstone 7 is the perfect example. I hate to keep harping on that, but it is the perfect example because currently it is outside of the city limits, but we expect them to annex before they develop. And if they annex, then they fall under this agreement, or this ordinance. But we don't have water lines out there. I mean, that's the fact of the matter, and it would take a lot to get water lines out there. So in all likelihood, the developer would come to us and say, can I have Ireland water out there because the expense of getting Jasper there? And in that case, I'm not going to be voting on it, but I would think that we would say yes, because it just wouldn't make any sense for us to.
It's $1 and
that infrastructure. So.
Can we dictate the quality of what they put out there? In other words, to avoid another problem like that?
They have to, yep.
So they have to conform to the standards of the city of Jasper then?
And so, we have, that's listed in our UDO, that they have to comply with city standards. We have, as you probably also know, what we call the standards manual that has standards for all kinds of things, streets and sidewalks and stormwater and all kinds of things. But not listed in that standards manual are specific standards for our utilities. Now, each of our utility departments has what they use as their own standards, but because of all of this, we've identified that as a need. So going forward, the utility departments are going to be putting together a compilation of their standards, and we will adopt that formally so that there's no question about what our utility standards are as well.
Provides a little protection for the future as well.
Sure.
On the planning side, that Brookstone area out there, you have Honeywell Gas, Jasper wastewater, Ireland Water, and REC Utility. So you're getting 4 separate utility bills instead of what we're used to here in town, of having 1 or 2. So if we can move forward, we can kind of have a little control over what's in.
Sounds good.
It's a good start in that direction.
Thank you for the explanation, Renee. I have a motion, Kevin, and a second from Chad. Any other discussion points, questions? If not, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is, I think you were copied on the holidays for 2021, planned holidays. So with this, I would just need a motion to,
Go ahead and make a motion to approve the 2021 holiday calendar.
I'll second.
motion from Paul and a second from Kevin. Any further discussion on these?
Pretty standard as in the past.
Yeah, we used, I don't know what, the same thought process about recognizing holidays on weekends so that it's consistent with past. Okay, with that, I have a motion and a second. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Our employees will love that they have holidays in 2021. The next item on the agenda is discussion around public on the nuisance ordinance.
There's someone here that wants to speak.
Yeah.
That was the idea.
Yeah, we wanted to bring up the nuisance ordinance and this time and see if there's anyone that wanted to speak regarding the hearing on this.
Not really a formal public hearing, just an opportunity for anyone in the public that wants to comment.
So if there is a member of the public that would like to make a comment on this, if you would contact.
So, a couple back here.
Maybe someone on the Zoom call also.
If you want to, just Lisa's checking.
Hello, Carla Nykum.
Hi, Paula.
Appreciate you all the opportunity. We have truly been wanting to make sure that you understand we want to be a part on the noise portion that has affected us so greatly. We don't want to just complain about it. We would like to help make sure that things are better. I know that we're doing a lot of things and that the city is doing a lot of things to try and make the city an even greater place, which it has already been named one of the best places to live in recent years. But to continue to make sure that when people move here or people come through here, that they don't just keep going, that things are looked at as a favorable place to be. I had put together some suggestions from our neighborhood on the proposed animal noise ordinance as far as in conjunction with what was originally stated and then what was proposed in the amendment, I believe is what that would be termed. Is that correct, Renee?
This is a nuisance ordinance.
Okay, right. And then, so the nuisance ordinance was to be part of what could back up the animal noise ordinance, correct?
So we have an animal ordinance that has a noise component. It's not an animal noise ordinance.
Right. Okay, so the animal ordinance to be backed up by the public nuisance ordinance, and within that is a noise
That's right.
component.
Yes.
The proposal that I saw in regards to noise under the public nuisance did not seem to us to provide any protection or relief from the situation of a animal-related business causing the disturbance. And seemed to be that it actually just coincided with the portion of the animal ordinance that affected noise. So the two do not seem to, if they are changed to those things, to do anything to protect the citizens and hold residents to a higher standard than what businesses would be held. Because if a resident has an animal that is making noise, they can be cited and fined for that situation. But when a business who is caring for multiple animals has the same infraction, they would not be held to the same standard. And in fact, would be able to make considerably more noise without any repercussions for it, which did not seem to make sense to us. I also noted that there was, and it maybe is covered somewhere else, but there was nothing in the public nuisance under the noise about the exemption for emergency sounds, which seemed like that is something that is absent from it that should be there for sirens and alarms, emergency vehicles, that those sounds would be exempt. That would make sense, while we did not feel that these specific industries should be exempt from something. You wouldn't exempt an auto place from a muffler noise just because they deal in autos.
So do you have these in writing that you could submit to us?
Yes.
Could you take a look at them?
So how would I go about doing that?
You can submit anything to me. I think you have my.
your email.
Yeah.
Right, so if,
Send it to us.
Yes.
okay, I could send to you and then it could be shared with everyone. Okay. And again, we really just feel that it's a huge part of being able to not only have a fair and even enforcement of a law. There was quite a few things within the public nuisance under noise that were factors, 12 different items. And it felt like when we went through that it became so cumbersome as to how in the world you could enforce something that you have to go through and determine, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? And it seemingly becomes the thing of, well, then there's a loophole for everybody in there. With a dozen different factors, it becomes quite complex. And I think we're trying to simplify things so that when the police department does get a call about something, or when someone has a problem, that it's pretty cut and dry as to what to do, no different than the water lines that you're talking about. You're trying to make things simpler so that it doesn't involve a bunch of people having to get together to talk about how to solve it.
Carla, are you talking just about animal noises here now, or are you talking about the whole 7 or 8 different things that are listed there?
We actually did go through that list and put some suggestions, and again, they're just suggestions. It's something that you all obviously are the people that are put in place and voted into, doing this, but we did cover things. Our emphasis certainly has been coming from the animal standpoint.
List will include all these other items.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, and thank you for taking so much time really to review all of this.
I would just say, caution you that with respect to that list, that is not intended to be an all-inclusive list of everything. So, and then with respect to the factors, it's just truthfully not as simple as having someone call in with a noise complaint and either it's a violation or it's not. That's why this process has taken so long. And I do appreciate the fact that you have tried to work and continue to try to work with us. I hear from constituents or citizens. I hear from staff. I hear from the police department and the code enforcement who are trying to enforce these ordinances. And so what we try to do is create a situation where the language is reasonable in a case like this. And that's what those 12 factors are intended to be, a method of looking and trying to determine what is reasonable. Because I can promise you, in every conversation that I've had about this since it started, it always comes back to what is reasonable. What is a reasonable expectation in a residential area? What is a reasonable expectation in a commercial area? What is reasonable for a privately owned pet? What is reasonable for a commercial animal facility? And that's what we're trying to help the code enforcement and the police and citizens, whether they are private citizens or commercial citizens, help them to figure out and to be able to look at this list of items and say, okay, based on what I'm seeing that is used to determine reasonableness, this is or isn't reasonable. So I just want you to understand that that is from where that list came.
I'd be curious still to see what she has to say here.
Oh, absolutely. I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't send, but I just want you
Or
to.
I'm just saying it's good to have other people look at what's going on.
I know. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's
what we're here. We were elected by the people to,
And that was the purpose of having this for discussion again this month without any formal action.
My other question is, and this isn't about Carla or anything, but is this published in the paper or something?
I provided,
See it on Facebook or something.
I did send a copy to the Herald, and we do have it on our social media, and I think.
And Renee sent it to us
Yeah, I've got it.
You shared it, I shared it.
for the public to read. Actually, yeah, it was on Facebook, and I had a few people comment on that, yeah.
I caught Nancy shared it first. I went ahead and shared it out to
I
Mike.
don't think everybody's on Facebook. Well, maybe I'm wrong, but it might be good to put it in paper if you did, and if you didn't.
I think Alan's going to do that tomorrow, right?
And nothing, the Herald or the Facebook, I don't know if the Facebook requires you to log into Facebook to see it.
You're asking the wrong.
Okay, because I know, no, okay. One of the other suggestions that we've had when we've talked about some of these things is with the utility bills, whether any of this type of information could ever be sent out on the utility bills. I mean, I know that there's a lot of information that gets included in utility bills, and that reaches so many of your homeowners within the city that it could be such an awesome tool to be able to make sure that people are aware of things. And then you don't have somebody saying, well, I didn't know because it was there.
You're right, and the utility stuffers are something that is scheduled throughout the year, and so, we use that for communicating key elements of the operation.
Yeah.
City, so you're exactly right.
It could be a great tool. And I'm sorry, just,
The cost of additional pages,
I don't think we could send out a notice that someone could get this online or.
that could be as well, too. Just from experience, you can put up to 5 sheets of paper in an envelope and still mail it for 1 ounce. Just to let you know. But I do have one other thing that, with where the noise was coming from for us before, we are starting to see a surfacing of an issue. And if you realize that it started the same way previously, where there wasn't as many animals in the care, and then the problem became larger as the business became larger. We are concerned because we're seeing this blow up again on us. And if you look at their Facebook page, you'll also see that from a safety standpoint, there is some training going on for aggression as far as teaching for attack. And some of that is being done outside of a building on the Riverwalk where there is no fence, there is no protection, and there is a lot of noise that when that happens. So I just caution you that we've fixed something. It has been tremendously better for us, obviously, but we're starting to see the problem creeping up.
Thank you, Carla.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any other comments regarding the nuisance ordinance?
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for having this open discussion. My name is Allison Engel, and I own Pedigree Professional Pet Services on the south side, I think that's called now. With regard to the noise ordinance and being in the pet industry, as I mentioned in the previous meeting in my letter, excluding the industry as a whole, whether it's a vet's office, a boarding facility, a grooming facility, my opinion is you're lowering the standard of excellence of Jasper, of the city, by singling things out when the law should be, or the ordinance should encompass and be fair to everyone. And from a professional standpoint, as an industry, we should be held to that higher standard that we are taking care of your animals in your absence or for you, or those that have been discarded in a humane and safe manner. And as an industry, as a private industry, any private industry will have its own set of standards, which you spoke to as far as utilities. There are standards for implementation of infrastructure. Well, a business has also its own standards, and some businesses are regulated and others are not. And unfortunately, presently, the pet industry is not a regulated industry. It's self-regulated. But through many years and many industry leaders, there is a set of standards, and there is ways to protect the citizens in and around those businesses. With proper and diligence in investigating what those solutions could be, it can be done. But again, as I mentioned before, now the issue of a private citizen and a business that has a larger volume than a private citizen with 1 or 2 pets, or as the law is, a maximum of 4 in a household, there is this level of reasonability that comes into question as far as noise. Coming from city areas where we don't have a lot of green area, and when you build a business like these, things that had to be put in place are noise dampeners inside the building to protect the noise outside, industry-wide not allowing barking as actual training for staff, which lowers the threshold of incidences in those businesses. And to Ms. Nykem's concern for the business near her, having worked with many working dogs and having experienced police canine units, I'm sure the chief can attest to when those units go for their partner training, it is a very specific type of training, and there's a lot of area for that training to happen. And there's a lot of safety measures in place. So the private citizen's concern for this advertising of this protection training, as a professional myself, I have cause for concern if that's happening in the city limits, because there's just a lot that can go wrong if it's not somebody who's well experienced in that type of training. And I can't speak to whether that person is or is not, and that's not what my point is. My point is just the safety concern that the private citizen has, I believe, is warranted to be looked at. And excluding from noise ordinance, her comment about, yes, the business started and it's kind of quiet, but as a business becomes more popular and people seek out those services, yes, those noise levels get higher, and it does become an issue. And excluding, as I said, I think is not a solution. It's a way to give preference and preferential treatment, and it's not necessary at all, because as a business, you should be caring for not only what your business provides, but for the general public at large that your business is surrounded by. And that's just kind of my position and to everybody about it. And if anybody has any questions,
Could you share the set of standards you were talking about?
Sure.
No, I mean to send them to.
Yeah.
I want something in writing, so sit and look at it and see if we need to incorporate anything with that into our.
When you say the set of standards, things that, like I mentioned, like noise dampeners in the building or.
Whatever, you said set of standards that.
So there were some regulations that your industry was
Yes.
coming up with, or standardization.
Standardization, yeah. I mean, currently with what I'm currently involved in, and with being a school, the standardization and the practices are more human labor and safety for the pet that is there. As far as a training facility and a boarding facility, it may take me a little while to go into some of the states that I lived in and where certain of facilities are, what those cities and towns have set in their ordinances as far as to help guide those businesses and protect the local citizens.
Anything you can share, just pass it on to Renee so that she'll pass it on to us.
Sure. Most definitely.
Also said there is no state standard for that, so it's just best practices.
It is best practices. There's no national standard. There's no state standard for both of these industries. I do believe with COVID putting a big spotlight on a lot of aspects to the employment of people in these industries, is that will cause some serious change in the next 5 years, I'm sure. But as it stands right now, unfortunately, there's not anything that, other than smaller towns like Jasper, that have implemented guidelines for businesses in other states. California, I think, is the one state that does have state regulation for the industry as a whole.
Allison, thank you for your comments, and
Here's my business card.
Renee's got her card, so you can send those standards to her. and-
Wonderful. Thank you again.
Thank you, Allison.
Thank you all for your time and your hard work. Have a good evening.
Is there anyone else that wants to comment about the nuisance ordinance?
I just got a quick, on a clarification of something here. Mike Caroline, I live at 1366 Altamar Road. In section 20 here, under vehicles, it states that nothing can be parked in the lawn. It has to be parked on impervious surfaces. That means you can't park a trailer or anything in the grass or anything. Is that true?
That's what that means, yes.
That's going to be, I'm going to have trouble because I got 5 trailers. I don't have enough space. I got neighbors that park trailers everywhere. That's just a standard thing. Parking trailers, if you're not using it, park in the grass to get it out of the driveway.
I'll tell you that is probably the section that we've struggled with the most, and that is the most complained about violation in the city. Parking, vehicles parked in yards.
I'm talking about just trailers, not cars or anything else. I'm just talking about trailers.
RVs, boats.
Right. I mean, that's been standard practice ever since my entire life here. Is, then we park trailers, if you get them out of the driveway, to put them, because you don't have room other than for your vehicles and that, so.
I understand what you're saying.
I can't buy a property and park it on an empty lot. I have to concrete it or put asphalt down to park it there.
So, again, that's the purpose of tonight's discussion, to get input. And frankly, I've told a number of people, we just had another meeting yesterday about that section, specifically that section. So I am open for input. Again, I will tell you that from all accounts, council members, police, code enforcement, parking of vehicles in yards and other places, but in yards, it has been like at the top of the list of things that we need to resolve.
Jasper is only one of the few towns that's got that requirement. Vernon don't, Huntingburg don't. They're allowed to park trailers in the yards.
Well, it's not there yet, and that's why we're having a conversation.
Because that's a big issue. I don't have any place to park my trailers at, basically. In the wintertime, I push them off into the yard to make room for the wintertime, and out there. I've got one place I can park one of my I got 3 other trailers that are parked at a friend's house right now, and they happen to be out in the country, so it's not a big issue, but I can't park all these trailers, everywhere else, because 3 of these I use all the time for different things, and I don't want to have to drive 30, 40 miles to pick up a trailer, use it, and then come and bring it back again, I went to this house with Vernon because we have a trailer parked over at a friend's house rental property. Neighbors didn't like it, they turned it in. Well, found out that the clarification, what they have in their thing doesn't apply to it. It only applies to commercial vehicles, not personally owned vehicle.
Right, but you just your comment, and that's what we're trying to speak to.
I understand that.
Because
I know
we have people complaining, and often. So we're trying to address that complaint. And if the council determines that they don't want to make that a requirement, and they want to allow people to continue to park trailers of all kinds and sizes and whatnot.
Was in the audience before. Was there anything about this? No. That's what I thought, because like I said, I've been my entire life, except for maybe 10 years or so, and it's always been a practice of doing that. And
Again, we're addressing the nuisances that we get complaints on, Mike.
okay. How about wash lines? It states in here that you can't have a wash line to speak of if it is visible from the street. My property is visible from 3 sides. That means I can't have a wash line in my yard then. So,
I think it says you can't have it in your front yard.
No, it states front, side, or whatever. It can't be visible from the street.
Yes, I'm trying to find where that is.
Signs or clothes hanging in front yards, on front porches, or balcony railings, and visible from the public.
Right. So that covers my entire property.
And it says those things and visible from a public street.
Oh, well, depends on which one. My address is on is actually the side of my house, not the front of my house. So if you go by where my address is, you'd be able to see it, because that's, depends on what you classify as the front yard, basically, whether your address is or whether your physical front of your yard is. So, okay, all right. We'll see how it goes.
Okay.
Thank you for your comments, Mike.
Renee, I had several things. First of all, is it the city limits or the 2-mile jurisdiction?
City limits.
City limits, okay. And then Noise on number 1, have we ever considered adding Jake breaks to that, or whatever they might be called in other communities?
I have heard comments about it, and I can have it, and so.
Just, I mean, I don't know why communities allow it or don't allow it. It's very loud. I hear them every day in front of my workplace. It's kind of annoying, but I don't know why a truck has to do that versus just stopping. I don't know.
I don't.
The quick answer for that is it's just an aid for them to stop quicker. The truck is the louder it's going to be when the
Yeah.
compression brake is kicking in.
Just something to think about.
And all our fire trucks have them.
Have Jake brakes, yeah. But I've never heard the fire truck do that, but anyway. And then on B, under the factors, standards, and conditions, I do agree that's a lot, and those are very kind of subjective. Who makes that decision on whether the level and intensity of the background, for example, the origin of the noise, the proximity? Those are a lot of things. Someone has to make a decision on those type of things. So that is just a lot of things to think about.
You're right, it is. The whole idea, though, is to give the code enforcement things to look at that would help him or her, if that happens, to determine if something's reasonable. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know any other way than to have something upon which to base an opinion about whether something is reasonable.
That's just it.
We've talked about,
Yeah.
Trying to set specific standards, but that they felt was highly unenforceable.
It just becomes a difficult part of the whole ordinance. And then over on 3B, prolonged accumulation, again, that needs to be more specific, in my opinion. Prolonged accumulation for one person could be a week, another could be 6 months or longer.
Does anybody have any suggestion? That's what I'm looking for.
I'm just throwing that out there as something I've kind of highlighted.
I'm open to suggestions.
From somebody that went through an entire house remodel 10 years ago, prolonged accumulation to me would be something.
Sitting there.
You could be doing a remodel where they could be bringing material outside and setting it there until you haul it off, or if you're taking it back in.
What number are you on?
30 days ought to be a reasonable amount of time to get something in and out.
Examples of items.
This nuisance ordinance and what we've written up here as a proposal, at least it's a draft.
Yeah. And just like number 3 on there, junk. That old saying, my junk is your treasure, your junk is my whatever. It's just an interpretation.
But I don't know how else we can do that. I don't think there's a way to write an ordinance, particularly on this subject matter, that doesn't require subjectivity. And if somebody chooses to appeal, they absolutely can do that. We have a procedure in place for someone to do that if they believe that how this is being implemented is unreasonable.
And then on 9, unused or inoperable appliances and appliances located outside. Perhaps that should say unused or inoperable appliances and operable appliances located outside, but intended for indoor use. Because you could have a refrigerator that works and it's plugged in and it's on your front porch. So maybe just adding operable. And again, on 12, weeds and shrubbery, interpreting shrubbery, maybe shrubbery shouldn't even be there, I don't know. It's just a lot of different things. On the new 17, attractive nuisances dangerous to children. And I understand what that means, because you don't want a child climbing in a refrigerator or those type of things, or machinery. But it could be dangerous to anyone, not just children.
Well, that is by definition what an attractive nuisance is, something that is attractive to children.
Okay, all right. 18, any item that is unreasonably accumulated. Again, I think it looks great, but my neighbor thinks it looks like junk. So just another interpretation. And then on 19, there should be no more, it's blank, how many items for sale at one time? That's really hard to determine.
I have been, the code enforcement suggested too.
So like if you had, for example, a four-wheeler and something else just sitting out for sale, yeah.
What about farm fresh eggs? Or farm fresh? 2 eggs?
2 dozen.
I'd like to tell you, Renee, you're all doing a good job at that. I believe in a lot of the stuff you're saying there, and I think in a position like this, or what's going on, is that we should provide you with a written statement too, or what their ideas are on doing things.
Yeah, we can do that too.
Sitting here and going through every one on there,
Well, I read this word for word, so when I was reading it, I was making notes. And then just on that one about vehicles, the length of time, so there is no length of time, it's just not allowed, is the way I'm reading that. There is no, like, it could be sitting there for 2 days, it's just no, not at all. Okay.
And again, that is the one, well, first of all, I do appreciate all the comments, and we'll go back through
And to the extent that any of you have comments about things that have been addressed or that have not been addressed, I absolutely would love to have your written comments, because those are what we rely on to tweak what we start with. But vehicles has been the most problematic. And I am happy to accept comments about, or suggestions about tweaking the language and how you feel about issues such as what Mike brought up, because that's the only way that we can get to a point where we have an ordinance that you're satisfied with. And then, once it's passed and in place, I promise it will get changed. That's just the nature of it.
Here's an example of something that happens, and it happens in our neighborhood sometime. A vehicle that is operable, someone lives a block over, but they park their vehicle in front of our neighbor's house. Well, it is a city public street. They have the right to park there, but the neighbor truly doesn't like it being parked in front of their house. But I mean, it is a public street. So there's nothing in here that addresses that, because the vehicle is operable, it's licensed, it's probably insured. It's not violating anything except for the fact that the person doesn't like it parked in front of their house. So there's really nothing we can do about that. Is that?
There's nothing illegal going on.
There's nothing illegal going on. I know.
Okay,
Yeah.
pick it up a notch here.
I only have one question, and it pertains to the campers. So family visits a resident from out of town, parks in the driveway. We're not, if we pass it as written, then we would be prohibiting them from occupying. Is that correct?
Well, so that's, the other part of this is that we're trying to make it consistent, or make sure our ordinance is consistent throughout. So the UDO also contains public
Vehicle nuisance provisions, and part of that is about the storage of RVs, campers, vehicles like that. So if your neighbor comes in and parks on your driveway, according to this language, I believe they would be okay.
I agree.
I think they should be. I mean,
But again, it's all about
You can't disallow everything.
of time.
Start regulating everything that happens on that.
And then the other part, under the enforcement, I'm not sure it says who enforces this. So is that built into UDO?
Just part of the code enforcement and police department.
So I didn't know if we needed that section as far as who enforces this ordinance.
That's found throughout in other sections as well.
Okay.
Renee, what is an unscreened parking area?
Screened is if it's got a fence or a wall, something that blocks it from view.
Landscape buffer.
Yep.
It's
Good question.
And I,
Really, the screened, it doesn't, I have a note there, it doesn't really say screened how, it just says screened.
In the UDO is all the
Okay.
languages, fences and landscape shrubbery and so on and so forth.
You've done a good job adding all of the red to this. I know that's been a lot of work.
Are there any other comments regarding the nuisance ordinance? And again, those things that you brought up, it'd be great if you could send those to Renee's attention
Okay.
so that we can, this is in process. We're not there, but it's in process.
I know the goal is to pass this and have this, up and running by January, but there's a lot of things to consider here.
Are there any other public comments?
and the other thing is, if you feel like you could be more effective having a conversation, just give me a call or come into my office. I'm happy to sit down.
Hearing no other comments, I would ask that we close the
It was not.
It's not open.
Discussion?
We'll just move on.
It's not open.
Going at it so long, Dean, you lost.
Resolution number 2020-9. This is a resolution of the Common Council of the City of Jasper accepting a restricted use donation.
I would make a motion to go ahead and
Approve.
approve the donation from the Victory Assembly of God to the police department as permitted, or as submitted, please.
I have a motion from Paul and a second from Kevin. Further discussion. Chief, do you want to?
Guy's been sitting here for 2 hours.
I just, real quick, though, I just want to get it out to you guys. Nathan Schmidt, Chief of Police, Victory Temple gave us a donation for $1,500. We're trying to get AEDs in all the cars. Adam Bowers has a few donations already. It's going to be about $1,500 a car. But, I think Dave would tell you how important AEDs are. And if we can get these in the cars, and anybody wants to get a donation that you guys know of, or donate one for a car, hit me up or hit Adam Bauer up, and we'd gladly take it. And we just think it's a great tool to hopefully save lives. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Chief.
It was very generous of them to do that.
It was. So I think, Paul, you made a motion. Did I have a second?
Kevin?
Seconded. All in favor of the resolution, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Can I ask one question about that? Every time that we receive anything like that, we have to do that here?
So, every
I don't want to extend this on,
You're right.
Every time we receive what is categorized as a restricted use donation, the board has to formally approve in writing the acceptance.
Okay.
If it's not a restricted use,
And this is specifically for AED, so that's restricted.
At the police department, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. With that, I would ask if there's a motion to adjourn our common council meeting.
It's unanimous.
Kevin, you got a card game tonight or what?
Really?
I'm just teasing you.
Now, my memory is short. We did pass that resolution, did we not? I thought we did.
0.
We had a motion to adjourn from Kevin, seconded by Chad, approved by everybody.
Call for a vote yet for adjournment.
All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. All right, have a good evening.